I do not accept that the idea of justice is something that could be rationally argued out or explained. Ultimately, justice is something that arises from our innate sense of fairness and is therefore ultimately based on an emotional assessment of the behavior of the people around us who engage with us in this thing we call society. Ultimately, we are emotional beings, and our sense of fairness is based on an innate, instinctive and emotional response to the behavior of the people around us. So therefore any idea around justice can and must be based on an emotional response of how people act around us. We base our laws on a sense of right and wrong that is ultimately based on this bedrock of an innate sense of fairness or empathy with other people. And none of these things are rational in nature. All of these things are instinctive and emotional. That doesn't mean that we can't use rationality in order to bolster our laws, bolster our system of justice, make it internally consistent and make our laws as just as we can perceive them to be. That goes without saying. And it is also true that based on our innate sense of fairness, our innate ability to empathize with others, we construct a moral code that varies from region to region, from person to person, and from society to society. All that goes without saying. All that are things that are open to amendment, open to reinterpretation, open to change over time. And therefore our justice can be approached in a rational manner, certainly. We can employ rationality to make our justice systems better. But ultimately, we do base our justice system on emotional responses to behavior of other people around us. And I therefore feel no qualms in saying things such as the death penalty is barbaric. In my opinion, my personal opinion, it is barbaric. In my personal opinion, any act of meticulously planning and executing the death of another person, to deliberately plan and execute the termination of another person's life, is murder, plain and simple. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, who perpetrates this act, on whom, and for what reasons. And it is therefore also very important that we base our assessment of the justice of something like the death penalty on generic principles. And on generic principles, it is clear that the death penalty is a meticulous planning and execution of the termination of a human life. And as such, it is murder, and as such, it needs to be rejected out of hand. Of course, it is always very difficult to look at such a generic understanding based on a personal experience with, for example, a murderer in your own personal life who has taken the life of somebody who you love. It is very difficult also for somebody to look at such a situation and to understand that that person's feelings about the murderer are, of course, very intense, very deep, and that certainly it is understandable that such a person would desire to see the murderer punished. And it is difficult to then take an uncompromising approach on this issue and say you have to stand on a matter of principle as a society that taking another person's life planning that and executing that is simply unacceptable in the face of somebody who has experienced such a terrible loss at the hands of somebody who in any sane person's mind would deserve to die. But that doesn't change the basic principles of what underlies the death penalty, and that is state-sponsored murder. And I do find it very peculiar, really, to see how some people who call themselves liberal, for example, and who are vehemently opposed to excessive interference of the state into their personal affairs, seem to be on the other hand okay with the state deciding who deserves or who is allowed to live or die. That is the ultimate form of state interference with a person's life. And that is another reason why I couldn't possibly accept the death penalty. So all in all, the death penalty, in my opinion, must be rejected on a matter of principle. And that is the principle that nobody is allowed to take another person's life. The state certainly shouldn't have that power over its citizens, and nobody should have the power to decide for themselves that another person should die and execute that plan. And ultimately, therefore, it is, as difficult as it is, necessary to shut your eyes to the heart-wrenching personal experiences that some people have had to endure at the hands of murderers, and stick to looking at the basic principles of the matter, and on that basis make your decisions. And on that basis it is clear to me, in my opinion, that the death penalty is barbaric. It has no place in our society, and I, for one, am glad to live in a civilized society in which such a thing cannot take place.